Usually when we think about the epicenter of global nightlife, we all have this very specific visual in our
Oh,
heads.
yeah, absolutely.
Like we immediately picture Miami. You hear the heavy bass pulsing through the walls. You see the neon lights reflecting off the velvet ropes. The endless stream of luxury cars.
Right, right.
We just imagine this world that is built entirely on chaos, excess, and like pure serendipity.
Well, because it's designed to feel that way. It's designed to feel completely unscripted. The illusion they're selling you is this beautiful, orchestrated frenzy where, I mean, anything can happen at any given moment. That is literally the product.
But the reality is the exact opposite. Because when you actually zoom out and look at the architect behind all that magic, you realize you aren't looking at a party promoter at all.
No, not even close.
You are looking at a systems engineer,
Mm.
someone who treats a crowded, chaotic dance floor and, honestly, his own internal bloodstream with the exact same level of microscopic, unforgiving precision.
Because it is, at its core, the absolute definition of a high-performance optimization puzzle. And the source material we have today really pulls back the curtain on the hidden mechanics of the human experience, both from a consumer standpoint and a biological standpoint.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a transcript that completely rewired how I think about energy and leverage. It's a conversation between human biologist Gary Brecka and hospitality magnate David Grutman.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating exchange.
It really is. And I want to set the mission for you right out of gate here. If you are listening to this, you're not here for like a timeline of a guy's career. This isn't just some biography.
No, definitely not.
We're going to extract the specific blueprints for optimizing two completely different yet entirely interdependent systems: your external business relationships and your internal physical biology. We're going to pull apart the hyper-aggressive tactics used to build a global hospitality empire and the exact clinical biohacking protocols required to sustain the relentless physiological energy you need to actually run it.
Because we so often compartmentalize our lives, right? We put our career strategies in one box, networking, negotiating, scaling, and we put our health routines in a totally different box, like diet, exercise, sleep.
Right, like they don't talk to each other?
Exactly. But the source material reveals this structural reality. At the absolute highest levels of performance, those two things are indistinguishable from one another. The analytical framework you use to manage a failing restaurant concept is the exact same framework you must use to manage your failing cellular health.
It's all just data and raw materials.
Yes. It relies on gathering hard data, sourcing premium raw materials, and ruthlessly confronting your own baseline of performance.
So let's start by looking at where this all begins, because the trajectory itself reveals a massive shift in mindset.
Okay, yeah.
David Grutman is currently a titan of the hospitality industry. He's a global name. But his origin story starts in Naples, Florida, which, by his own admission in the transcript, is essentially a massive retirement community.
Yeah, he actually jokes about that. He says all of his friends growing up were 90 years old and are now dead.
Right, so he leaves this quiet, slow-paced town, gets a finance degree, and somehow ends up working as a bartender in the Aventura Mall in Miami. But here is the critical data point that just blew my mind. As a 21-year-old bartender, he is pulling in $100,000 a year.
$100,000.
At 21.
Yeah, that's wild.
Now, for the vast majority of human beings, that is the finish line. You hit that number at that age, you put the car in cruise control, and you just ride the wave. I mean, most people would be absolutely thrilled with that. But he didn't. He didn't want to just pour drinks. He wanted to be a leader.
We really need to pause and analyze the psychology of the hospitality industry here to understand why that mindset shift is so rare. For decades, the service industry has been treated sociologically as a waiting room. It is the quintessential in-between job.
Right, it's the thing you do to pay the rent while you pursue your actual life.
Yeah.
You bartend while you wait for your acting agent to call. Or you wait tables while you study for the LSAT or something.
Exactly. It's transient by nature. The workforce views the environment as temporary. But Grutman's competitive advantage was realizing that hospitality didn't have to be the waiting room. It could be the entire mansion.
Oh, I like that.
He refused to view it as a stepping stone. Instead, he looked at the mechanics of service and recognized it as a lifelong, highly scalable system. He realized that the act of taking care of people, of anticipating needs and curating an emotional experience is a universal currency.
Yes.
And the moment you treat a transient job as a permanent, specialized profession, your perception of the environment radically alters. You stop seeing the people sitting across the bar from you as just a $20 tip. You start seeing them as permanent nodes in a long-term network.
And the proof of that concept is right in the text. The owner of that exact mall where he was bartending eventually became a major partner in his future nightclub empire. Yeah. The guy who owns the real estate you're slinging drinks in becomes your equity partner, purely because of how you engineered the relationship from behind the bar. It proves that a bartender doesn't become a global magnate by just having the best margarita recipe. The cocktail is irrelevant.
It's totally irrelevant.
It requires mastering the absolute rarest currency in business, which is relationship capital.
Which brings us to the mechanics of high-level trust and what Grutman explicitly refers to as the long game.
So there's a very specific story in the transcript where Brecka, the biologist, thanks Grutman for a piece of advice that effectively saved his own business.
Right, the PR crisis.
Yeah. Brecka was dealing with an ultra-high net worth A-list celebrity client. Some sort of social media kerfuffle occurred. A picture got out, a narrative spun out of control, the celebrity was furious, and the entire relationship was imploding. Brecka calls Grutman in an absolute panic, asking for crisis management advice.
And Grutman's response completely defies standard PR logic.
It really does. He tells him, always play the long game. Just get into their flow. Don't ask for anything. Just add value, add value, add value. And he explicitly warns Brecka against ever going for the short press.
And we should define that. The short press is the industry mechanism for leveraging someone else's crisis for your own temporary gain. It's, leaking gossip to a tabloid, pointing fingers to cover your own liability, or just generating negative friction to get a quick bump in search engine relevance.
And Grutman explains that competitors who execute that strategy, the ones who sell out an A-lister for 15 minutes of defensive fame, they don't just burn that single celebrity.
No, the collateral damage is massive.
They burn the publicist, the agent, the manager, the lawyers. And those gatekeepers control the access to 20 other high-profile clients. You aren't just losing one account, you are nuking the entire bridge.
We have to examine the sociology of the A-list ecosystem to understand why this is so critical. Because at the very top of the food chain, whether you are looking at Hollywood, Wall Street, or elite culinary circles, the environment physically shrinks. It is a highly insulated micro-society.
Everyone knows everyone.
Literally everyone. The gatekeepers are all having dinner at the same tables, sharing the same information. In that ecosystem, trust is highly fragile and immensely valuable. When you go for the short press, you are sending a massive signaling flare to the entire network that you are a biological liability. You are a threat to the organism.
I try to think about this in terms of banking, right? Most networking, the way average people execute it, is like walking up to an ATM and trying to make a massive cash withdrawal before you have ever bothered to open an account.
That's a great analogy.
You meet someone powerful, and within 5 minutes you are pitching your startup, or asking for a favor, or trying to leverage their audience. It's an immediate attempt at extraction. Grutman is essentially arguing that you have to just keep making deposits of value indefinitely without ever asking for the withdrawal.
Indefinitely.
But I want to challenge the premise here for a second. Let's look at this through the lens of human nature. If you exist in a high-powered environment, and your entire strategy is to just constantly add value, solve problems, and give without ever asking for a return, how do you prevent yourself from getting completely crushed?
It's a fair question.
Right. In the real world, won't narcissists and takers just bleed you dry? Doesn't this strategy carry a massive risk of turning you into a total doormat?
That is the exact fear that prevents 99% of people from executing the strategy, and honestly, it's a completely rational fear. Our evolutionary defense mechanism is based on reciprocal altruism. If I share my food with you today, my brain demands the security of knowing you will share your fire with me tomorrow. We inherently track the ledger.
We keep score.
We always keep score. But Grutman's strategy relies on the overwhelming, shocking rarity of pure value addition at the elite level. When a highly successful person, someone at the top of their field, encounters an individual who solves complex problems, brings exceptional energy, and actively asks for absolutely nothing in return, it creates a psychological anomaly. Powerful people are so accustomed to being leveraged, pitched, and extracted from that a person who refuses to leverage them becomes instantly indispensable. You do not become a doormat. You become a sanctuary.
A sanctuary. Because you are the only relationship in their life that doesn't carry a cognitive tax.
Precisely. And eventually, the law of reciprocity kicks in organically, but the scale is entirely different. You aren't asking for a small favor. They are forcibly pulling you into their inner circle, giving you equity, and sharing their network because they need to ensure you never leave their ecosystem.
Wow. And that psychology ties directly into how Grutman advised Brecka to handle the actual crisis. He didn't tell him to spin the narrative. He didn't tell him to hire a crisis PR firm to muddy the waters.
Right.
He said, just be honest. Call the celebrity and say, I made a mistake. I understand why you're upset, and it will never happen again.
This is a masterclass in psychological disarmament. Let's trace the mechanism of an argument. When someone is angry with you, their amygdala is firing. They are in a state of fight or flight. They build up this massive cognitive wall of defensive arguments, preparing for you to make excuses, deflect blame, or minimize their feelings.
They're bracing for impact.
Exactly. When you bypass all of that, walk right up to the wall and say, you are completely right, I was entirely wrong, there are zero excuses, and I will fix the structural issue that caused this, their entire defensive architecture instantly collapses.
And there's nothing to fight.
There is literally nothing left for them to push against.
Mm-hmm.
The kinetic energy of the conflict evaporates in seconds, and what rushes in to fill that void is a profound, almost jarring respect for your structural accountability. That is the architecture of the long game.
So for anyone listening, you do not need to be navigating a crisis with a Hollywood actor to apply this mechanism.
Yeah.
If you are operating in a corporate hierarchy, or running a mid-sized logistics company, or even just navigating neighborhood politics, run an audit on your own behavior.
Absolutely.
When was the last time you added undeniable value to a colleague's life without secretly harboring a mental ledger of the favor they now owe you? When was the last time you made a structural error and simply owned it completely without offering a single mitigating caveat? That is the mechanism of compounding relationship capital.
It's incredibly powerful.
But earning the trust of powerful people is really only the foundation. Once you've accumulated that capital, the question becomes, how do you convert it into actual physical leverage to build an empire? How do you transition from being a trusted operator to being the owner?
Right.
And that brings us to the early days of Grutman's career and this insane tactic of radical negotiation.
This phase of the transcript outlines the shift from a mindset of high-level service to a mindset of structural architecture. He stops wanting to operate the machine and decides he wants to build the machine.
We get this incredible case study in the sources regarding a company called the Opium Group. At the time, this was a dominant nightlife syndicate in Miami run by Roman Jones. They identify Grutman as a talent, and they want him to come in and run their nightlife operations.
But the partners in the group are highly skeptical.
Very. They've been burned by promoters before.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really know Grutman's actual operational capacity. And to make matters worse, Grutman walks into the negotiation and demands an exceptionally high salary. The partners immediately balk. They reject the number outright.
Which is standard
pushback. So Grutman counters with a proposition that seems almost reckless. He tells them, I will work for you for 1 full month at your low rate. But if you want to keep me on day 31, you have to agree to pay me my high rate going forward. And D, you have to cut me a check to back pay the difference for the first 30 days.
The audacity is amazing.
Right. And according to the transcript, they didn't even make it to 30 days. They folded and agreed to his terms after just 2 weeks because his operational value was so undeniable.
Let's dissect the economic and psychological mechanics of what Grutman executed there, because it is a brilliant application of risk asymmetry. In any hiring negotiation, especially for a high-level executive role, the primary friction point is always risk.
Yeah, the employer is terrified.
They're running a mental calculation. They're thinking, what if I lock this guy into a massive contract and he turns out to be toxic to the culture? What if his operational skills were exaggerated? I am trapped with the financial and organizational liability.
So Grutman just absorbs all of it.
He looked at that exact friction point and completely internalized the risk. He took the entire liability off the employer's balance sheet and placed it squarely on his own shoulders. He essentially acted as his own underwriter, saying, I am so mathematically confident in my ability to generate undeniable revenue that I will personally finance the trial, period. By completely removing their barrier to entry, he bypassed their ego, their skepticism, and their financial anxiety.
He essentially weaponized his own competence.
Yeah.
But let's look at the mechanics of why that works so fast. They capitulated in 2 weeks. Why didn't they just ride out the full 30 days to get the cheaper labor for as long as possible?
Because competence at that level is immediately recognizable, and the power dynamic fundamentally shifted the moment he started working. Once he was in the building, optimizing their systems and generating value, they realized they weren't evaluating him, he was evaluating them.
Ah, right.
He wasn't begging for a job. He had provided a risk-free sample of excellence, and the panic shifted to the employers. Their new fear became, if we don't lock this guy in immediately, he is going to realize he doesn't need us, and he'll go do this for our competitor. By absorbing the risk up front, he manufactured extreme leverage on the back end.
So he successfully secures the platform. He's at Opium Group. He has the salary. He has the authority. But he immediately recognizes a structural flaw in the nightclub industry. Yeah. A nightclub inherently is just a dark, empty room.
That's all it is. 4 walls and a speaker.
And Grutman realizes he doesn't want to just be the charismatic guy at the front door shaking hands. He wants to engineer the reasons people care about the room in the first place. And this is where he deploys a concept that the sources highlight as borrowed brand equity.
This is such a smart play.
Instead of just throwing a standard Friday night party and promoting his own name, he starts leveraging massive, established corporate entities. He brings in Playboy, Mercedes-Benz, Versace. He starts throwing their launch parties and their corporate events inside his venues.
We can understand this best through the mechanism of osmotic pressure in physics.
Okay, lay it on me.
If you put a highly concentrated solution next to a low concentration solution, the pressure naturally forces the high-density material into the low-density space until they reach equilibrium. Grutman understood the physics of brand perception. As you noted, a nightclub has almost zero intrinsic value. The value is entirely perceived. It is based on the narrative of exclusivity and status.
Yep.
If Grutman simply invites people to a party at his club, he is competing in a low-density space against every other dark room in Miami. But if he hosts a Mercedes-Benz launch event, he is opening a valve. He is taking 100 years of German luxury engineering, precision, and global prestige, a massive concentration of brand equity, and allowing it to flow directly into the empty vessel of his nightclub.
He didn't have to spend 50 years building a legacy of luxury. He literally just rented Mercedes-Benz's legacy for the night.
Exactly. He elevated the baseline perception of his own brand by forcing the consumer's brain to associate his dark room with bulletproof, multinational legacy brands. He engineered an aspirational ecosystem through association.
And he clearly masters this mechanism because he takes this exact concept of brand equity to an almost absurd extreme later in his career.
Oh, the Prince story.
Yes, the transcript details his acquisition and total revival of the Prince tennis brand. For anyone who grew up in the 90s, you know Prince. It was the iconic neon green, oversized racket brand associated with Andre Agassi and Michael Chang.
Huge brand.
But over the decades, the brand collapsed. It went bankrupt. The intellectual property was sitting with Authentic Brands Group. Grutman decides he wants to acquire and revive it. But in the conversation with Brecka, Grutman admits a detail that is incredibly revealing. When he bought the company, he didn't even like tennis.
He had zero passion for it.
None. He had zero passion for the sport itself. He bought a massive athletic equipment brand without caring about the athletics. How does a move like that not end in total disaster?
Because he recognized that he wasn't actually buying a sports equipment company.
Right.
He was buying a dormant emotional trigger. This requires an understanding of consumer neuroscience, specifically how the brain processes nostalgia.
Okay.
When humans form memories during their youth, especially memories associated with status, aspiration, or cultural moments, those memories are heavily encoded with emotion. Grutman recognized that the Prince logo held a deep, unquantifiable emotional resonance for an entire generation with disposable income. To him, the brand didn't represent a backhand swing. It represented the aesthetic of country club America.
So he was buying the memory. He saw the intellectual property purely as a lifestyle fashion play, not a performance athletic play.
Exactly. The utility of the racket was irrelevant to his strategy. People aren't buying a vintage-styled Prince jacket today to improve their cardio. They are purchasing a physical artifact that connects them to the feeling of their own youth.
That's brilliant.
It is a brilliant example of detaching the physical product from the psychological utility. He recognized that the aesthetic equity of the brand was far more valuable than the performance equity, and he was willing to step into an industry he didn't even participate in because he understood the emotional levers better than the engineers who actually built the rackets.
But let's be intellectually honest here. Yeah. When you operate with that level of audacity, when you are negotiating radical salary terms, acquiring bankrupt brands in industries you don't play in, and absorbing massive amounts of risk, the law of averages dictates that you are eventually going to miss.
You have to. It's inevitable.
You are going to fail, and you are going to fail publicly. And to the credit of the source material, they do not shy away from this reality.
Huh.
In fact, how Grutman processes failure might be the most crucial data point in understanding his overall ecosystem.
This is where we transition from external market strategies to internal psychological management. We have to examine the role of the ego in capital allocation.
We absolutely have to talk about Winker's Diner. The context here is vital. Grutman is on an absolute tear. He is this unstoppable force of hospitality, opening sleek, high-end, highly profitable, globally recognized venues like Komodo and Live. He has the Midas touch.
He can do no wrong.
Right. And then he decides to open a diner. But not just any diner. It is a highly stylized, vintage architectural space. And he names it Winker's Diner, after his one-eyed cat, Winker, and he designs the menu around his own personal favorite comfort foods.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
Let's pause and analyze that setup. A guy who has succeeded so consistently that he believes his own hype, builds a massive restaurant, names it after his pet cat, and serves his own cravings. It sounds like the textbook definition of an unchecked ego project.
It does.
And the market responded exactly how you would expect. It bombed. The concept was a total, unmitigated failure.
And in the transcript, Grutman is brutally honest about that failure. He admits that it was a disaster, and he explicitly acknowledges that his ego took a significant black eye. But the actual failure of the diner is scientifically irrelevant. The critical mechanism is his response time to the failure.
The pivot.
Yes. We need to look at the behavioral economics of the sunk cost fallacy. When a standard entrepreneur, driven primarily by ego, experiences a highly public failure like that, their psychological defense mechanisms take over. They cannot tolerate the cognitive dissonance of being wrong.
So they double down.
Exactly. They pour millions of dollars into aggressive marketing campaigns to try and force the public to understand their vision. They cycle through 5 different executive chefs, they rebrand the menu, they burn through operating capital for 3 years, all to avoid the emotional pain of admitting defeat. They allow the sunk cost to act as a vampire on their resources.
But Grutman overrides that psychological trap. He looks at the data, sees it isn't working, and he shuts the entire restaurant down after 3 to 4 months.
Which is incredibly fast.
3 to 4 months. In the timeline of commercial real estate and restaurant development, that is barely a heartbeat. That is a clinical, emotionless amputation of a dying limb.
He tells Brecka his exact philosophy on this. He says, I am not going to put good money over bad, but it goes far beyond the capital. He recognizes a fundamental law of physics in business bandwidth is a finite resource.
Right.
The mental energy, the hours of meetings, and the sheer operational anxiety spent trying to resuscitate a dead diner concept is energy directly stolen from a concept that could yield a 10x return on investment.
And his speed of execution proves it. Almost immediately after amputating Winker's Diner, he pivots the real estate. He partners with a friend who brings in the sugar factory concept, and they launch it in the exact same physical space. The new concept is a massive financial success. By surrendering his ego to the reality of the market data, he preserved his capital, saved his bandwidth, and ultimately retained the value of the real estate.
This capacity for rapid, egoless pivoting is the only way an ecosystem of his scale can function. The transcript reveals that he has evolved far beyond running a few nightclubs. He operates as a venture capitalist now. He is investing heavily in founders across entirely different sectors. Liquid Death canned water, Goodall's mac and cheese, Less Crumb cookies, skinny dipped almonds.
He's everywhere.
He casually mentions overseeing 22 upcoming openings, ranging from hotels to resorts to day clubs. He has forged major partnerships with Live Nation. You simply cannot manage a complex, multivariable ecosystem of that magnitude if your cognitive processing power is tethered to a failing diner named after your cat.
This philosophy of suppressing the ego also dictates how he handles geographical expansion. When you have a flagship success, the overwhelming temptation is to treat yourself as a conqueror. You say, my model is perfect, I am going to copy and paste it into every major city in America, and they will adapt to me.
The traditional franchise model, it assumes the original formula is superior to the local culture.
Right. But look at how Grutman handles the expansion of his flagship brand, Komodo. Komodo is a massive 7-year-old success in Miami. He decides to expand it to Dallas. But he doesn't just plant his flag in Texas and demand the market conform to his Miami sensibilities.
He adapts.
Yes, instead he brings in highly connected, local strategic investors. He actively alters the proven menu to reflect the local palate. He specifically mentions adding quail to the Dallas menu because he recognized that it resonated deeply with the Texas culinary landscape. He suppressed the ego of the out-of-town genius and willingly deferred to the cultural reality of the new ecosystem. He favored symbiosis over colonization.
It is the ultimate expression of prioritizing the outcome over the ego. He wants the restaurant to win more than he wants to be right about the menu.
So for you listening, this requires a moment of harsh, clinical self-auditing. I want you to identify your own Winker's Diner. What is the project, the failing business initiative, the toxic relationship, or even the outdated habit that you are currently funding purely out of pride? You know the data is bad. The market or your family or your own body is telling you it is failing. But you are terrified of the black eye.
It's hard to let go.
It is. Grutman's methodology challenges you to embrace the swift amputation, cut the cord, absorb the temporary hit to your ego, and redeploy that trapped bandwidth into a system that actually yields a return.
But here's where the source material takes a fascinating turn, because recognizing the need to pivot, managing venture capital portfolios, expanding into Dallas, and overseeing 22 properties requires a cognitive pace that borders on the superhuman.
It's insane.
And Grutman admits to Brecka that he literally cannot sit still. He hates vacations. He hates being alone with his own thoughts. To sustain this level of hyperactivity, this relentless, sprawling expansion, he realized he could no longer rely on sheer willpower, caffeine, and adrenaline. He had to completely overhaul the biological machine that was driving the empire. He had to turn his systems engineering brain inward.
This is the pivot point in the transcript where business strategy becomes indistinguishable from physiological strategy.
Yeah.
And the parallels in how he approaches both are incredibly revealing.
So revealing.
Grutman hits a massive physical wall. He's reaching the absolute pinnacle of global hospitality. His empire is expanding exponentially, but internally, the machine is breaking down. His weight peaks at 240 pounds. Now, he isn't lazy. He is grinding. He has a highly respected trainer, Anthony Rhodes, and through sheer brute force willpower and calorie restriction, he manages to drop his weight down to 190 pounds.
But then the system stalls.
He hits a plateau he cannot break. He is chronically exhausted, his energy is erratic, and he feels terrible. And this is exactly where Gary Brecka, the human biologist, enters the narrative with a fundamentally different diagnostic approach. Brecka doesn't say, you need to run more miles on the treadmill. He says, we need to look at the cellular data.
Because Brecka treats the human endocrine system exactly the way a forensic accountant treats a failing corporate entity. He completely ignored the surface metrics, like the number on the scale, and demanded to look at the biological profit and loss statement. They executed extensive, comprehensive blood panels and a DNA cheek swab. They eliminated guesswork entirely and moved to a purely data-driven model.
And the data they uncovered was alarming. The blood work revealed that Grutman's testosterone was sitting at a level of 97. Now, I want to unpack that because throwing a number out there doesn't capture the severity. A testosterone level of 97 for a male is not just low, it is abysmally clinically deficient.
We need to explain the physiological mechanics of what a level of 97 actually does to a human being. Testosterone is not just about muscle mass, it is a foundational neurosteroid. It governs motivation, cognitive clarity, metabolic rate, and dopamine regulation. When your level crashes to 97, your body is effectively entering a state of hibernation.
Literally shutting down.
Yes. You experience severe lethargy, profound brain fog, and your metabolic system begins storing fat as a survival mechanism.
And his other markers were just as disastrous. His blood sugar was highly elevated, his insulin levels were completely dysregulated, and his cholesterol was through the roof. Grutman actually jokes in the transcript that he blamed his terrible cholesterol on eating massive dinners at his own restaurant, Pappy Steak, every single night.
But the underlying mechanism of that total system failure is cortisol. Grutman was operating in a state of chronic, high-stakes stress for decades. When the human body is under constant stress, it produces massive amounts of cortisol. But the body uses the same raw materials, specifically pregnenolone, to make both cortisol and testosterone. This is known biologically as the pregnenolone steal. Grutman's high-stress lifestyle was literally cannibalizing the raw materials needed for testosterone just to produce enough stress hormones to keep him awake. His internal biological environment was collapsing precisely because his external empire was expanding.
This brings us to a concept Brecka introduces in the conversation that completely shifted my perspective.
Yeah.
He calls it baseline normalcy, and it is a terrifying psychological trap.
It really is.
Brecka observes that the vast majority of people walk around claiming they feel pretty good or even amazing, but they don't actually feel amazing. What has happened is that their physical baseline has degraded so slowly over such a long period of time that their brain has simply recalibrated to accept exhaustion as the new normal.
It is a function of neuroplasticity. The human brain is designed to adapt to chronic pain or fatigue by turning down the volume on the distress signal so you can continue to function. But that adaptation blinds you to your own degradation.
I want to use an analogy to make this mechanism perfectly clear. Imagine you are driving a brilliantly engineered high-performance sports car. But unbeknownst to you, the emergency parking brake is pulled up. You've been driving with the brake engaged for 20 years. You press the gas pedal to the floor. The engine is screaming. You are burning through massive amounts of fuel. The transmission is grinding, and you are maxing out at 40 miles an hour.
Okay, I see where you're going.
But because you have driven this way for 2 decades, you look at the speedometer and think, wow, 40 miles an hour. I'm really flying today. This car is great. Then a mechanic like Gary Brecka opens the door, looks at the console, and simply disengages the parking brake. Suddenly, you barely tap the accelerator, and you are effortlessly cruising at 120 miles an hour. You look around and think, oh my God, I have developed superpowers.
But you don't have superpowers.
No, you haven't magically evolved. You are simply, for the first time in your life, operating the machine the way the engineers originally designed it to run.
That is the exact mechanism of baseline normalcy. Modern society has completely normalized chronic fatigue. We have accepted brain fog, poor sleep architecture, and sluggish physical recovery as inevitable symptoms of getting older or being a hard worker.
It's just part of the grind, right?
Right. But Brecka argues, and the data supports, that human beings have absolutely no concept of how aggressively they can thrive when you simply restore the missing raw materials to the bloodstream. Grutman was asking his body to perform at the highest echelon of global business strategy while simultaneously fueling that machine with 2 packs of cigarettes a day, heavy alcohol consumption, and a diet of fried food.
It's amazing he survived.
He was demanding premium, elite output from highly toxic, degraded input.
And the physical results of correcting that input are staggering. Once Brecka optimized his hormones and fixed the nutrient deficiencies, Grutman broke through his plateau instantly. He went from that stuck weight of 190 pounds down to a lean 170 pounds, maintaining excellent muscle mass. And at nearly 49 years old, he explicitly states on the recording that he feels vastly superior to how he felt when he was 19.
But the physical transformation isn't even the most important takeaway here. It is the psychological shift in how he views discipline. He tells Brecka, people think I'm sacrificing. I'm not sacrificing. I'm enjoying.
That distinction is the linchpin of permanent behavioral change. Let's look at why standard diets have a 95% failure rate. They're psychologically built on a foundation of deprivation. The entire mindset is focused on what you are losing. You are constantly mourning the loss of the pizza, the sugar, the alcohol. It requires endless willpower, and willpower always depletes.
Exactly.
Grutman, however, built his new protocol on a foundation of acquisition. He didn't view it as losing the fried chicken. He viewed it as acquiring intense, sustained vitality.
He actually refers to his new biological habits as his drug of choice, specifically the cold plunge. He tells Brecka that getting into a freezing cold plunge for 3 to 6 minutes is his new addiction.
A lot of people are doing that now.
Yeah, and when he gets out, he says he feels like he just won the lottery, and that euphoric, untouchable mood lasts for 7 straight hours. He says he wishes he could grab people on the street and tell them they don't need artificial stimulants to feel that incredible.
Let's explain the actual neurobiology of why the cold plunge feels like a drug, because it isn't just a placebo effect, is it?
No, not at all. When you submerge the human body in freezing water, the shock forces massive systemic vasoconstriction. Your blood vessels clamp down to protect your core temperature. But more importantly, the brain releases a massive surge of norepinephrine and dopamine. Studies show cold plunging can spike dopamine levels by 250%.
250%.
Yes, but unlike artificial stimulants, like cocaine or heavy amphetamines, which spike your dopamine unnaturally high and then cause a devastating crash that leaves you feeling depressed, the dopamine release from cold exposure is slow, sustained, and incredibly stable. It elevates your baseline mood and focus for hours without the subsequent physiological debt.
It is literal chemical engineering.
Yeah.
And he pairs this chemical engineering with physical behavior modification, specifically through tennis.
Yeah.
Now, remember our earlier conversation. He bought the Prince tennis brand purely for the aesthetic. He admitted he didn't even like the sport.
Right, the nostalgia play.
But during the pandemic, he actually picked up a racket, and now the transcript reveals he plays for 2 solid hours every single morning, from 8 to 10 a.m., rain or shine. If it rains and he can't play, he admits he gets genuinely irritable.
But we have to look at the psychological utility of the tennis. It is not just about cardiovascular health. Brecka points out a critical psychological reality for highly driven, type A entrepreneurs. For a mind that is constantly processing venture capital deals, analyzing 22 construction sites, and monitoring global hospitality trends, traditional sitting meditation is not relaxing.
It's probably maddening.
It is a form of psychological torture. When you put a hyperactive mind in a silent room, close your eyes, and try to focus on your breath, the default mode network in the brain goes into overdrive. The mind screams. It floods with anxiety about everything you aren't currently doing.
So tennis becomes the hack. It becomes active meditation.
Precisely. The sheer visual and physical focus required to track a small yellow ball moving at 80 miles an hour across a net forces the business centers of the brain to shut down. You cannot mentally litigate a real estate deal in Dallas when a tennis ball is flying directly at your face. It forces the brain into the present moment. It is mandatory kinetic mindfulness.
And trace this out to its logical conclusion. Optimizing his biology wasn't just a vanity project to look good on a yacht. It was a strict operational necessity. By fixing his endocrine system, utilizing the cold plunge for sustained dopamine, and using tennis to quiet his anxiety, he built a biological chassis capable of handling the extreme, microscopic stress of his daily management style.
Which transitions us perfectly from the macrobiology of his bloodstream to the micro details of mega hospitality, because the way he actually runs his restaurants requires a terrifying amount of sustained cognitive energy.
This segment of their discussion is vital because it completely dismantles the modern myth of passive income in the hospitality sector.
It really does.
You hear the phrase global magnate, and you immediately picture a guy in a tailored suit, sitting in a boardroom overlooking the ocean, just reviewing quarterly spreadsheets and cashing checks. But Grutman's operational reality is insanely, almost obsessively hands-on.
He's always on.
He tells Brecka that even when he is off the clock, just sitting at a table in one of his own restaurants, eating dinner with his family, his brain is constantly scanning the geometry of the room. He is watching the tables 50 feet away. He is spotting dirty plates that have been sitting empty for too long. He is monitoring the pacing of the meals, which he refers to as the sequence of service.
The sequence of service is the invisible psychological architecture of a luxury dining experience. It is the exact metric that separates a restaurant that merely delivers calories to a table from a restaurant that curates an emotional evening.
And there is a specific anecdote he shares that illustrates how aggressively he protects that architecture. I call it the sushi and duck rule.
Oh, this is a great story.
Grutman constantly monitors his venues through social media. If a customer tags his restaurant in an Instagram story, Grutman is watching it. And he tells Brecka that if he looks at a customer's photo and he sees a plate of delicate raw sushi sitting on the table at the exact same time as a heavy, hot, cooked duck dish, he loses his mind.
He goes ballistic.
Because he immediately knows exactly what the server did. He knows the server went to the POS computer and fired the entire order into the kitchen at the exact same time.
Because firing all the tickets at once reduces the physical labor for the server. They don't have to walk back and forth to the terminal. The server prioritized their own operational convenience over the pacing of the guest's experience. They dumped the entire meal on the table, destroying the culinary journey.
Right. And how does Grutman handle this? He doesn't take out a notepad, write down a memo, and bring it up at the staff meeting the next Tuesday. He looks at the Instagram photo, identifies the geometry of the room to figure out exactly which table it is, and he calls the manager of the restaurant immediately, while the shift is happening.
In real time.
He confronts the failure in real time. He explicitly states that he refuses to be the passive-aggressive executive who sends an email the next morning. He demands that the issue is corrected on the floor, in the moment, while the guest is still in the building.
Now, we need to view this through the lens of organizational psychology. In almost any standard corporate environment, this behavior would be classified as highly aggressive, toxic micromanagement.
And I want to push back hard on his tactic here. Let's look at the economics of turnover. If you are the CEO of a massive empire, and you are calling your floor manager in the middle of a chaotic Friday night dinner rush because you saw a photo of a duck next to a California roll on the internet, doesn't that create a culture of absolute paralyzing panic?
It's a risk.
How can your management team ever breathe or make independent decisions if they know the Eye of Sauron is literally tracking their social media tags from across the city? Doesn't the cost of burning out your managers and constantly recruiting new staff far outweigh the cost of one poorly paced meal?
It is a highly rational critique, and if you were running a mid-tier fast casual chain, you would be entirely correct. The turnover cost would destroy the margin. But you have to factor in the economics of luxury perception. In ultra-high-end hospitality, the brand promise is perfection. People are not paying hundreds of dollars for the physical ingredients of the duck. They are paying for the flawless execution of the environment.
That makes sense.
This relies on a concept similar to the broken windows theory in criminology. If a window in a building is broken and left unfixed, it signals to the environment that no one cares, and soon all the windows are broken. In hospitality, brand degradation is rarely a massive, scandalous blowout. It is a slow, quiet leak. It is a series of tiny, uncorrected compromises.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. Grutman argues that calling the manager immediately isn't about punishing the server for the duck. It is about establishing an uncompromising, zero-tolerance standard for compromise. It sends a shockwave through the culture of the building that says, the details matter relentlessly and we are always watching. It forces us to ask a difficult question about executive leadership. Are you willing to be deeply, intensely unpopular in a specific moment to protect the long-term, multi-million-dollar integrity of the brand?
And the transcript notes that his presence physically alters the environment. He says that when he walks through the front doors of one of his venues, the energy in the room instantly shifts. The staff stands a little straighter, the focus narrows. But here is the critical caveat that prevents it from just being tyranny. It only works because the staff knows he actually possesses the technical skills to do their job.
Right, the bartender background.
This loops all the way back to our introduction. He didn't parachute into the CEO chair from an MBA program. He started as a barback. He's the bartender. He tells Brecka that his staff resents being micromanaged by empty suits, but they accept his demands because they know he can jump behind the bar and make the drinks. They know he can run the point-of-sale computer system faster than they can. They know he can bus a table. He possesses the physical mechanics of the entire operation.
That is the crucial distinction between coercive authority and legitimate authority. You cannot effectively demand perfection in a mechanical process that you do not deeply understand yourself. If an executive demands faster service but doesn't know how many keystrokes it takes to fire a ticket, the staff simply writes them off as delusional. But when the owner can run the systems better than the trainee, the demand for excellence carries a totally different psychological weight. The correction shifts from feeling dictatorial to feeling instructional.
He is so obsessed with maintaining this ground-level reality that he executes a specific rule when he dines at his own restaurants. You would naturally assume that when the billionaire owner comes in for dinner, he wants the general manager, the absolute top guy, taking his order and pouring his wine.
You think so?
He absolutely forbids it. He demands to be served by a standard frontline server. He doesn't want the VIP treatment. He wants the raw, unfiltered, baseline experience that a random tourist from Ohio is getting. He wants to gather accurate data on what the standard of service actually looks like when the staff thinks the boss isn't looking.
And in doing so, he clearly defines the psychological difference between good service and great service. The industry standard of good service is purely reactive. The guest realizes their water glass is empty, they signal the waiter, and the waiter efficiently refills it. A problem occurred, and it was solved.
But great service.
Great service, luxury service, is entirely predictive. It is the art of anticipating the biological or emotional desire before the guest even registers it consciously. The second cocktail arrives precisely as the last sip of the first one is taken. The water glass is never empty, but the guest never consciously notices the waiter pouring it. The objective is to completely remove cognitive load from the consumer. It requires the staff to possess deep empathy and hypervigilance.
Which brings us to the ultimate friction point, the paradox at the center of this entire deep dive. Let's look at the portrait we have painted of this man. You have a human being who is hypervigilant by nature, who physically cannot sit still. He's managing venture capital portfolios, overseeing 22 new global venues, engineering his endocrine system to sustain aggressive energy, and tracking Instagram tags at midnight to yell at managers about a plate of duck.
It's a lot.
How in the world does a machine calibrated for that level of relentless, paranoid execution actually shut down and show up as a father and a husband?
It is the classic, often tragic paradox of the highly successful entrepreneur. The exact psychological traits required to conquer the external marketplace. Obsession, hyperfocus, emotional detachment, speed are the exact traits that will systematically destroy the internal ecosystem of a family.
And this leads us into the final major theme of the conversation, which is the mechanics of balancing the grind with actual human presence.
Yeah.
And I have to say, for a conversation between two highly aggressive business operators, the source material here is shockingly vulnerable.
It requires a level of self-awareness that many executives never achieve. Grutman introduces his wife, Isabel, into the narrative, and it becomes immediately clear that she acts as the structural grounding force in his chaotic ecosystem.
She seems incredible.
She is a Brazilian model who left her home country at 14 years old to work in Korea. So before she ever met him, she had developed her own deep well of psychological resilience and independence. Grutman met her in New York, took her to a single lunch, and through sheer force of will, convinced her to move to Miami just 1 week later.
1 week. The man closes deals with terrifying speed. But the transcript makes it very clear that she is not just a passive passenger on his rocket ship. He notes that she is highly entrepreneurial in her own right. She operates her own clothing and jewelry brands. And there's a specific detail about her business acumen that fascinated me.
Oh, the brand deals.
Yes, when she negotiates brand deals or endorsements, she refuses to take a flat fee. She actively demands equity in the companies she works with because she understands her own ability to move the needle and generate revenue.
If you recall our earlier analysis of Grutman expanding Komodo to Dallas, we discussed how he relied on local strategic investors to understand the nuances of the Texas market. Isabel serves a similar but profoundly more vital role in his personal life. She understands the culture, the pacing, and the boundaries of the home ecosystem in a way that he, with his hyper-expansive, always-closing mindset, is biologically prone to miss. She acts as the governor on his engine.
There's an anecdote in the transcript that illustrates this dynamic perfectly. I call it the Happy Meal tantrum.
That's a good name for it.
They have 2 young daughters, Kaya and Vita. And Grutman admits his natural instinct as a father, especially as a wealthy father who works constantly, is to just give them whatever they want. He wants to relieve pressure. He wants to buy out the toy store to make them smile.
Sure, it's the easy out.
So one evening, one of his daughters is throwing a massive, screaming tantrum because she wants a McDonald's Happy Meal for dinner, but the family had already planned to eat something else. Put yourself in Grutman's shoes. He is exhausted. He's been managing thousands of employees, fighting supply chain issues, and negotiating leases all day. His brain just wants the screaming to stop. He looks at Isabel, completely defeated, and says, should we just get her the Happy Meal so she stops crying?
He is seeking the path of least resistance. He is trying to manage the symptom, the crying, rather than the root cause.
Exactly. But Isabel looks him dead in the eye and says, if you go get her that Happy Meal, I'm going to kill you.
I love that.
Because Isabel understands the long game of operant conditioning in parenting. If you reward a child's screaming tantrum with a highly processed, dopamine-spiking Happy Meal, you have just hardwired their neurological pathways to understand a dangerous formula. Emotional outbursts equal material rewards. You are not calming them down. You are systematically training them to be entitled.
She held the structural boundary that he was simply too mentally fatigued or too eager for immediate peace to hold. It is a brilliant illustration of why partnerships require opposing skill sets. But Grutman's vulnerability goes much deeper when he discusses the actual physical effort required to be present. He tells Brecka, completely unfiltered, that being present with his children does not come naturally to him.
I found this to be the most refreshing moment in the entire conversation. He outright admits it takes immense effort. He says that when he is sitting on the floor playing with his kids, his brain is screaming at him to check his phone.
It's an addiction.
He is craving the dopamine hit of seeing what deals are closing, who is texting him, what the revenue numbers look like for the night. He has to actively, intentionally force his brain to disconnect from the matrix of his business and just exist in the slow, unoptimized reality of a child's playroom. It is rare to hear a billionaire look at a microphone and admit, actually, being a present dad is incredibly difficult for me. It feels like withdrawal.
It validates the silent struggle that almost everyone navigating the modern economy experiences. We have engineered an environment of constant digital connectivity. The human brain becomes deeply addicted to the intermittent variable rewards of the smartphone, the slot machine effect of pulling down to refresh an email inbox, the validation of a solved problem, the ping of a notification.
It's so hard to break.
To willingly put that device in a drawer and engage in a low dopamine environment like building blocks with a toddler requires immense executive function and discipline. He realizes that presence is not a passive state of being. It is an active, heavily taxed verb.
And part of their strategy, to engage as a family, to force that presence, is through massive global exposure. He talks about dragging his young daughters all over the globe with them. He lists off taking them to Saudi Arabia, climbing the pyramids in Egypt, navigating Israel, exploring Tokyo, walking through Paris.
That's quite the itinerary.
He is highly self-aware about this. He knows they're very young. He explicitly says they might not consciously remember the specifics of the trips when they grow up, but he is betting on a deeper psychological mechanism. He believes that physically exposing them to entirely different cultures, different climates, and radically different social structures will leave a permanent subconscious imprint on their worldview. He is essentially trying to build their relationship capital with the entire globe before they even possess the vocabulary to understand what it is.
To tie it back to Brecka's scientific framework, Grutman is engineering his daughter's baseline of normalcy. Just as Brecka had to engineer Grutman's biological baseline to expect high energy rather than fatigue, Grutman is ensuring his daughter's baseline understanding of the world is inherently expansive, culturally diverse, and highly adaptable. He is programming their operating system.
So let's take a step back and synthesize this massive, complex ecosystem we've just deconstructed. We started in the waiting room of the service industry, analyzing a 21-year-old bartender who realized that the act of serving people wasn't a menial chore. It was a highly scalable, universal superpower.
We looked at the sociology of how he built impenetrable relationship capital by playing the long game, relentlessly adding value to high net worth individuals without ever asking for a withdrawal, and instantly neutralizing conflict through total, excuse-free accountability.
We saw him convert that trust into physical leverage through radical negotiation, absorbing the operational risk of the opium group to secure his own worth, and utilizing the physics of borrowed brand equity, pulling the prestige of Mercedes-Benz and the nostalgia of Prince Tennis to elevate his own empty rooms.
We also examined the brutal, necessary reality of failing fast, the philosophy of Winker's Diner, the ability to suppress the ego and override the sunk cost fallacy in order to swiftly amputate a dying project, thereby preserving the finite bandwidth and capital required to oversee a 22-venue venture capital empire.
We explored the biological mechanics of the ultimate human transformation, the stark realization that you cannot drive a global empire on a degraded, cortisol-soaked endocrine system, the necessity of a data-driven approach to hormone optimization, the physiological engineering of cold plunging for sustained dopamine, and the genius of using high-speed tennis as a physical override to quiet a hyperactive default mode network.
All of that biological optimization was necessary to sustain the microscopic, taxing vigilance required to spot a misplaced duck on a plate from an Instagram photo, and to enforce the uncompromising standard of luxury in real time.
And finally, we analyzed the grounding structural reality of the home, the active, highly intentional, and sometimes chemically painful effort required to break the addiction to the machine, suppress the conqueror's ego, and be genuinely present for the family that anchors the entire operation.
It is a blueprint of relentless, total system optimization.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over this week. Something that connects the very beginning of our analysis to the biological reality of the end.
We spent a significant amount of time at the top of the show dissecting Grutman's golden rule of elite networking, the advice he gave to Gary Brecka: add value, add value, add value, without ever asking for anything in return. We established that this is the mechanism for building trust with an A-list celebrity or a skeptical business partner. But I want you to look closely at the irony of his health journey. For 20 years, Grutman was executing the exact opposite strategy on his own internal biology. He was constantly demanding that his body perform at the absolute highest levels of stress, hospitality, and execution. He was making massive daily withdrawals of energy without ever depositing the proper raw materials back into the system. He was demanding a massive return without adding any value to his own biology, and the system collapsed.
That's such a good point.
So, I want to challenge you to apply Grutman's external networking advice to your own internal ecosystem. What if you spent the next 12 months simply adding value to your physical and mental health? What if you deposited deep sleep, optimized nutrition, and active meditation into your system without constantly demanding that your body yield high performance, high stress results in return? What would happen if you finally decided to play the long game with your own cells?
That is such a profound inversion of the concept. Treat your own biology like the ultimate A-list client. Add value until your body becomes a sanctuary, rather than a machine you are constantly trying to leverage. Take a hard clinical look at your own baseline of normalcy this week. Are you actually thriving? Or have you just been driving with the parking brake engaged for so long that you've forgotten what the engine is supposed to sound like? Find your Winkers Diner, shut it down, put the phone in a drawer, and start playing the long game. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.